Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to the book launch of High Performing DevOps Enterprises. My name is Andy, and I'm the host of today's show. Over here, we have three guests that have written in the book their own stories, their war stories, and they are here to share their experiences. May I introduce the first guest?
Hi there, my name is Sjoerd Blum. I'm responsible for all IT, data and technology at Schiphol.
Cool, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm Alexander Widdeveen. I'm working at Elsevier. I'm VP Technology Excellence and Engineering, working in Amsterdam.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Tim Drijvers. I'm CTO at SendCloud, a logistics solution for e-commerce.
Oh, nice. And good to know, dear guests, is that these speakers over here have written their stories in the book and they are here to share their stories. And please be aware that you can write your questions into the chat because those will be answered at the end of today's session. Cool. Now, I would like to give the word to Raoul, the CEO of Devon.
Schiphol, Bol.com, AFAS, Picnic are some of the most successful organizations in the Netherlands. What makes these companies stand out as compared to the others in their industries? Well, these are great examples of organizations who have leveraged DevOps culture and mindset to accelerate the journey towards high-performance enterprises. We have a lot to share with you today on the recipe of building high-performance enterprises. Thank you, Andy, for the warm welcome. I am Rahul Shah, CEO at Devon, and delighted to welcome all of you on the official launch of a book, High Performance DevOps Enterprises, a perspective of Dutch technology leaders. This book is unique in its own way, as this is co-authored by 16 technology leaders in the Netherlands from over 12 high-performing companies. Over the years, Devon has helped many large-scale enterprises with the challenges and needs around DevOps transformations. We have spoken to several CXOs over the years of large-scale organizations, and we see that they realize the need of DevOps practices and mindset in the journey towards high performance. But at the same time, face multiple challenges in executing and scaling a transformation of such a size. So we went ahead and we spoke to some of the high-performing companies in the Netherlands and asked their IT leaders on how did they strategize and execute such a transformation. The result of these interviews and discussions were quite insightful. And with this book, we intend to share the same with you. Some key highlights we would like to address with this book are, what do these companies do differently as compared to a lot of other organizations which are facing these challenges? How did these companies execute, implement, and measure such a transformation? What challenges did they face in their journey? And what are the future trends these organizations and IT leaders see in the coming years? This book is meant for leaders and managers and professionals who are either interested with building high-performance organizations or are really passionate about this topic. I would like to thank all the co-authors of this book for putting in the effort to write such a beautiful book. And I hope this book inspires a lot of other organizations to accelerate their own journey towards high performance. Thanking you all, and over to you, Andy.
Cool. Thanks, Raoul, for your story about the book, but also the journey towards a high-performance organization or an enterprise. Cool. Now we have the time to speak to our guests over here, of course, and to start asking questions because there are some learnings in the book, but maybe we would like to know more about it. So write down your questions, but I will start questioning mine now. Cool. Sjoerd, can you explain us why DevOps for your organization?
Yeah, sometimes you have to learn something that feels completely unnatural to yourself, right? It's something new, something you have to start all over with. For us in Schiphol, DevOps is everything but that. And why is that? If you look at what doing technology at a hub airport means, is basically always standing on 2 feet. First foot is all around keeping the airport 24/7, 365 days per year running. The second foot is all about creating the airport of tomorrow. As we say in Schiphol, we are always ready but never finished. And I see it already happening in your mind. If you listen to that, that's always the balance between the ops and the dev. And how to best balance that is to give it in one hand, as we are also, as human beings, always standing on 2 feet. So for us, the movement towards DevOps was completely natural from that perspective, and of course also from the continuous change that we are facing and the power we want to have in the teams.
Sounds great. What kind of value did it already brought to the company Schiphol?
Many ways. So they are on the harder side. So basically, if you look at the performance of the team, it's the velocity that increases, so this efficiency. We've also, in part of our DevOps journey, also started to measure more on value. That also has gone up. But at least as important also is the softer side. So if you look at the culture, where more and more the teams feel that they own their own results, they take their responsibility, that's also a big value there.
Oh, cool, good to hear. Tim, how is it about ownership at your company?
I think DevOps plays a key role there. So using DevOps, and we like to standardize things around that, we can enable teams to take ownership, to build, run, and deploy things into production independently as well, right? So that decouples the entire development team and makes sure we have high velocity of the teams. It creates a sense of ownership. It creates purpose for the developers because they really own something. And you don't have this central ops organization, right, to make sure the platform keeps on running and becomes a bottleneck. So by doing that, we also created an organization that can further scale.
Interesting. But this all takes time, right? So Sander, how did you manage this, right? How did you create the capacity or the time or the focus within your company?
I think for us, it's also a natural evolution of what we're going through. I mean, Elsevier is also a pretty big company, like more than 8,000 employees across the globe. We're highly matrixed. Creating time usually comes with bigger pivots. We've gone through a couple of them. One of them is actually building bigger technology hubs, like we've built one in Amsterdam, for example. We've hired more than 170 top talent engineering into the business within 1.5 years. Right, so there's a big investment happening into technology talent. And then if you look purely at technologies, well, the majority of things are starting to go into code, right? So policies starting to turn into code, security starting into code. Yeah, you naturally pivot into the DevOps movement, right? Because you need to have the capacity and the time, the processes and the tools to bring the group closer together, because you can't keep functioning in separate silos, because that will impact your velocity, as you had already said. But it will also impact the outcomes that you deliver as a company and the products that you build. Right? And especially in the environment that we're at, where the climate is accelerating, also from a customer standpoint, you just need to be able to go faster with higher quality and build better products for our customers. So that's what we're doing. So that's part of it. Yeah.
Nice. From my own experience, I know that it's pretty tough to get this topic on the agenda of the board. How did you manage that?
Well, we're a 3 billion euro company. If you hire more than 170 engineers in one location, it's a pretty big investment that you're making. Right? And if you know that you're going to hire that top talent also expects a certain environment to be there. So that naturally also comes with doing items like those, right? And we do that across the globe. So do we create time for that? I don't think specifically, no, but it's part of the journey that we're going through. So you'll carve out the time to set up the environment, set up the tools, set up the processes, and we do that as fast as possible to a shoot story, also to keep the business running, keep the products online, but then also do the pivot in the background, build a platform where we connect all the data, right? The share platform, the data platform that we're building, and then also make sure that the culture fits, getting the right tools and the right processes to start also accelerate basically the products that we create. So it comes naturally when you go through a technology pivot, like Elsevier is also going through.
Oh, cool.
So it's part of it.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a big world, right? The world of DevOps. Sjoerd, one question for you to continue on this topic. Looking at the organization of Schiphol, and you talked about the dev and the ops organization, how did you convince the business to get capacity for this or the time? Because this is a journey, right? It's a journey that is not finished, let's say, in a couple of months or weeks. This is a journey of possible years. So how did you convince your business colleagues?
Yeah, so we did not necessarily make it a DevOps story in itself. So we put a lot of emphasis in, let's say, the bigger transformation of the company. I think like a tech company, in each and every aspect of what's happening at the airport, technology and data become an inseparable part of the primary process, just like a tech company, I would say. Yeah. And if you embrace that thought, it's about also saying, hey, then we should be doing things differently than we did before. So part of the changes we had to make, because the airport is already around for quite a bit, and we have been doing IT there also for quite a bit, that was first indeed to kill the handover between the ops and the dev within IT, and then more and more make that shift towards the biz, so the biz DevOps side of things, which would start in cases where we would just have people of the DevOps team sit with the business, like that's the first step towards becoming one team, and then where possible integrating. By taking it step by step and not making it a big academical discussion about, you know, where we will be 10 years from now, that was for us the way to start fastest. And because before you get to the business case that was described just now for the 170 employees, you need some tangible results as well within your own setting. That is the way that we did.
So you use Agile as well in iterative process. That's great.
From me,
sounds cool. Tim, how can you maybe explain or give us the top 3 enablers for DevOps at your organization? If you go back in time, right, what were the top 3 enablers?
I think what was key for us is that DevOps, of course, was not a goal in itself. So I really like also what's being said here. It enabled us to become more customer-centric. If you want to with your own customer-centric, you need to have fast iterations. You need to be able to iterate your product, get feedback from customers instantly. So a key enabler for us was being highly agile. Another key enabler was to get ownership as low as possible into the organization. So you don't create central bottlenecks, you make sure that things are being decoupled and you can go as fast as possible. And I think a third one will be innovation. What we see now is teams outside of the product development organization embracing DevOps as well. We have people at finance running Airflow jobs in their own separate Amazon environment. We have an internal team doing all kinds of business automation. And each of them embraces DevOps and deploys their own code to automate things. So you can really innovate on many different levels outside of the product as well to become an entire agile organization, I would say.
Cool. Great answer. Hope that you have written this all down at home or at office or where you are at this point of time. So I heard a lot about ownership, innovation, and of course also agility. But with that comes also a skill set. So Sander, could you please elaborate on that? How did you manage that, right? Because we come from a more traditional world out there, and of course people have studied the new ways of working. They have learned possibly already from DevOps, and of course they have brought some experience from other companies as well. But how did you manage this? To get the right skills, right?
I would say we managed it. We more steered it as in which direction it needed to go. Because again, if you start to manage it, things tend to become a lot slower. So I wouldn't say managing it, but skill set from a people perspective, is that what you're referring to, or more the organization?
Yeah, and how did you make sure that you just talked about all those engineers and all the people that you hired, but then also they aren't really fitting at the job as always, right? It's of course the 70% or maybe the 60%, but how did you make sure that those people in the end have the right skills?
Oh, and there needs to be a short answer, right? So I'm going to try, right? I'm going to try. So I think the first thing that we've done is, we in Amsterdam, we built it from scratch. So we set up also an environment so that the people felt welcome, and also with the skill sets that we were hiring. Of course, we are an enterprise business, right? We're around for at least 300 to 400 years, so we're a pretty old business.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, usually we talk about the new stuff and faster iteration, but I think it's also respecting the culture that is currently there and respecting the processes that are already present in the company for a longer time, because we also have a lot of employees that maybe not fit the agility mindset, but they have a real deep knowledge pool around the products and the customers and how systems work and how flows work. And I think it's a delicate balance between hiring the people that more have the DevOps mindset, right? So they're fast and iterating, they're curious by nature, they constantly want to improve, they want to go faster, but then also not lose the people that are not on that train yet.
Yeah.
But also make sure that the knowledge that we already have doesn't go away, right? Or the people decide to go away, right? Because that's incredibly important. They need to actually be combined at a certain point in time. I think that's what we did, balance out what we already had with hiring the new, then also have an environment in place that, well, basically accommodates both, but is leaning more towards the DevOps way of working.
Yeah.
But within a pretty big enterprise of what we are, that just doesn't happen in a month or a year, right? We're talking 2,000 people only in technology, again, spread across the globe. It's not only in Amsterdam. It's setting that precedent, but also working with the structures that you currently have and the organization model that you currently have, but then, well, usually financially prove what the value is of working in a different way. And then you go into predictability, velocity, but you also go in, for example, like, okay, so if you do it this way, this is the amount of financial resources that you'll save by working in a more efficient way. Not even talking about reintroducing that back into your delivery pipeline, because you could also do it like, oh, so we could actually run leaner. You could, but that's not the intention. The intention is to re-inject that and accelerate your journey going forward. So it's also the financial side, right? In a bigger business, to also get everybody on board to invest in that and continue to invest in that to, well, basically fuel the acceleration.
Yeah, that's a great thing, right? That can be forgotten is that DevOps and of course the automation that comes with it shouldn't be used to lose people in the end, right? Or cut costs, but in the end it should be reinvested in the organization, and that's where the value, of course, is of DevOps. But looking at those journeys, right, so-called transformations, Sander, what skills are indispensable, right, in such DevOps transformations?
Oh, I think as I said before, I think the majority of the things start to turn into code. Right? So the dev piece is pretty important to start focusing also on that basic skill set, so that people are more familiar with that. I wouldn't say that everybody then is an engineer, but it's making sure that you bridge both sides. Bridge the upside, of course, right? Because there are skills that you actually need to run a system, to keep it running, right? And to also fix certain impediments. But it's investing also on the newer side of maybe more the automation mindset, the technology mindset, newer systems. You can run stuff in the cloud. You can do things serverless, like make that pivot that people are curious about that side of the business. That's one of them. And then also the transitional journey of getting the right processes in place, right? Again, focusing on more the velocity, the predictability, getting a operating cadence in place, more the agile ways of working, making sure that you hire the right people that already have that skill or are willing to learn that skill. I think that's one of the things that you need to do. And I think the second bit is also work with senior management, get them on board, inform them of what it's doing, and also be gentle, right? Because there are certain parts of the system that are quite delicate at a bigger enterprise.
To continue on that topic, right, leadership, because we talked a lot about DevOps engineers or dev people that need to learn ops skills, but the other way around as well, right? And it's important. But we also have leadership, right? And leadership in the end can make a difference. That's also the reason why we're here. Could you please explain how did you tackle that within your organization? Because leadership can be seen as an impediment, of course, but it can also be seen as the accelerator. So I'm curious, how did it went and how?
I think in our roles, the key thing is that we should see ourselves as the accelerators there. And if you look at, the journey that we have gone through, I would basically say we have shifted from what we used to refer as management to leadership. And then What do I mean if I say management is more the traditional way of actually delegating responsibility, work that is put on your plate to the team, and you ask them to report back into it, right? And then you need several layers because at a certain moment it becomes too big, and you are just there happily ruling your kingdom. So those days are gone, and unfortunately, dear viewers, they will also not come back. So we have shifted to a world of leadership, where in fact the first thing you have to really embrace, and that's not just here, it's also like in your personality, that the key difference that you will be making for your company is within the teams. And those are the people that actually know best how to tackle the key assignments. Leadership is now much more about, okay, what type of teams do we need? What type of skill sets do we need within those teams? And what assignments do we give them? And if you have installed that, your sole focus should be on how do I make those teams successful.
Yeah.
How does that play out? Delayering of the organizations become a lot flatter. We have lower number of people not doing work, fewer what we call indirect roles. So I'm with you there, not everybody is an engineer, but you can really look at all roles, who is contributing to the product and who is just talking about products. Yeah, much more responsibility, and therewith also leadership within the team, within the people themselves. And that could also be on the softer side, and next to the capabilities that you addressed, you also need the people that can handle that. Because if you come, it requires, if you compare to how the development and ops was the development and the ops was done in the past, it also requires change from your people. And the new hire, you can select at the gate, but we have been going on a journey that we also were, to take a lot of our talent along.
Cool. Tim, I'm interested. What if you look back in time, right? What was the thing that you needed to learn as a leader, right? Because DevOps is also new, and we just learned that we come from a world of management, and now we're supporting DevOps organizations, and we're leading them, right? Of course. What was the number one thing that you needed to change or learn, or to look back in time? What was the disrupting thing?
The disrupting thing was to really take a step back and look at all the teams, and then also in the sense of leadership, how can we enable those teams to do their job well? For me, it's all about enablement. So how do you enable them to, take ownership? How do you enable them to deliver high quality code? How do you enable them to run that at scale? How do you enable them to get super close to customers and get that feedback loop going? And that is something that you need to learn along the way, right? That's trial and error. That's getting confidence in actually doing DevOps. You cannot just take a system, include DevOps on top, as let's say we go to the cloud and we deploy it in the cloud, right? What you also see is that many engineers also would like to do things still by hand, right? They like to jump into the machine, do their thing. But if you need to do that on a larger scale, that becomes almost impossible. So you need to gradually move away from doing that into code, into automation. You can never do that big bang, right? So the journey has been, I would say, how do you enable them? And then, doing that step by step, building confidence in the teams, try to do more automation, step away from doing things by hand, up to a level where you can just press a button.
Yeah. It's interesting what you just mentioned, right? It's people that still like to do manual scripting or manual deployment, maybe manual development. But how did technology in the end help out, right? Because those people need to be inspired, but how did technology in the end help out? To maybe convince them to make use of the automation, right? Because the world is pretty big around that.
I think you need some champions in your team, right? You need people to lead by example, to perhaps build a proof of concept, to show that it's possible. Take a small part of the system and give it a go. Build up confidence around that. Get people involved. For us, that has been the way of doing that. And then hire talent and inject that in the team. Get people on board that have done it before, for instance. And let them teach people while they're actually doing it to become a bigger part of it. It's definitely not something which I think you do push top down into the teams. So it's been a journey, I would say, for everybody that's been working at a company. From we were quite small when I joined 6 years ago, deploying stuff on one single machine, then moving into the cloud. So that required automation, that required that journey.
Yeah, okay, cool. And if you then look at technology, right, possibly there are companies that aren't that far ahead, right, like you are. What is the number one thing that they should do, right? If you look at technology, because technology can enable, and yeah, it's a big world out there.
Yeah.
They might be experimenting with some automation, but looking back, what is the number one tip that you would like to give them now? Right?
I would say regardless of technology, even if you are on Kubernetes, if you're still deploying to bare metal machines, those kind of things, I would say it's key to get your continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline up and running.
Yeah.
That's something that you can easily automate. Start to do that, build confidence around that, and then try to get faster and better at doing that. That's, I would say, such a key enabler for teams to get stuff out into production. So that would be the bare minimum, I would say, to do.
Yeah. Sander, how did you manage that, right? Because continuous integration, continuous delivery, in the end, all those pipelines, teams have their own IDs, right? And they like their own tools, so to say. But large enterprises these days are also looking at standardization of such technology. So how did that go at Elsevier? And
I tend to always wrap that in the phrase, I call it alignment through autonomy. Because we have a like a red thread with certain centralized tools that we use. So a couple of them are met. For example, we got GitHub and we got CrowdStrike. We got a couple of the basic tools that we basically say, okay, well, these are the ones that are really not debatable. These are the ones that you need to use because that will help us from a global standpoint. On the other hand, we also give teams flexibility to use certain other tools if they are under the impression that they can do it in a faster and a better quality way. So there is also flexibility in the groups to do it in a certain way, but there's also more the alignment piece on the bigger piece. Yeah. So because again, right, if you hire a lot of the top talent, you can't really tell them which tools to use. Up to a certain level you can, but you can't basically dictate. And also if you would do it that way, you would also get a stagnant pool of deprecating tools at a certain point in time. So you also need to make sure that the refreshment continually goes on while not creating a wildfire of all kinds of different tools. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we basically have in place, and I wouldn't say, well, we're managing it relatively well from a tooling standpoint. From a process standpoint, well, that's what we're highly experimenting with. So we got the technology excellence group within Elsevier, and I think the thing that what we're doing is we're experimenting within the groups what works and what doesn't work at a smaller scale. But then we're also thinking about, so if this works, does it really work for the bigger group, and can we write basically more the, I wouldn't say the policies, but more the guidelines and the guardrails around that. And that's what we're actually implementing into a reference model, so that it's going to be more of a blueprint that works for Elsevier. Instead of grabbing a blueprint or getting consultancy left and right trying to get it done, we're basically building our own operating model with industry standards, implementing that into a central place and continuously evolving with all the squads and groups to improve that model and framework going forward. And we got a couple of key enablers actually identified for that, to keep the continuous integration and continuous delivery of our operating model. That's going to be part of our core, next to just building the products, what we do.
That's
great. That's more these central piece that will accelerate the organization.
So I heard a lot about that, enabling the teams, but also learning from that, and also creating your own reference model, or such as, so to say, technology framework, or even a framework for an organization that can support high performance. This all brings value, right, in the end to the company. And I think a lot of leaders out there also thinking about, hey, what's the return on investment, right, in the end? And that's not always in value, in money, described. It can have value, can come from other stuff as well. So I'm really interested to hear from all of you what the return of investment is at this point of time, right? Looking at the journey that you have gone through. Shall I start with you?
Yeah, sure. And so I really have to control myself
Yeah,
not to respond
to
on
be
the
short,
great
right?
inputs on these. No, yeah, also, I'll also be short. So basically, yeah, so you have your shared components,
Yeah.
what we refer to as the tech and the data foundation, that they basically enable all of the products. So there you have a value story which is much more about efficiency. It's more about uptime, but it's not the hard side of the benefits. You can flip it around a bit as saying, hey, if we do this all with point solutions, this would be the cost, and you could go and compare. But it's, you know, you get into theoretical discussions. If you look at the products you are building, you know, you can be much more value based. I think you were looking for one number. Well, if you look at what Schiphol is doing all across the businesses, I would have to end up with many different numbers. So let's see if one of the others can be more specific on that one.
Cool. Sander, can you explain a bit more? Maybe chat with us about the return of investment for Elsevier, right? Looking at DevOps.
Well, in the end, there is only one return on the benefit, and that's what's the value to the customer, right? That we build the products and solutions for. So that in the end should be the outcome that all the efforts that you put into it should drive.
Yeah.
I think the financial pieces, especially within bigger companies, are usually center stage. And of course I understand that, but usually it's a lagging factor that basically comes after introducing successful products that customers are actually willing to pay for.
And follow-up question on that, how did you measure that, right, for the customers? Because in the end, we all want to add value in the end to the end customers, especially with our DevOps journey. How did you prove that, or let's say, how did you manage that it has added value to the customers of Elsevier?
Well, I think from a technology business side, and if you look at it from a value perspective, it's educating the group into explaining what certain technology initiatives bring to the end customer, right? If I can give you a fact or more of a practical example, I usually see teams struggle to explain why they implement a CI/CD pipeline. Yeah, because we just need to do that, because that's what the DevOps piece needs to actually be successful. That's not the reason, right? There's no reason of implementing any kind of tool or building any kind of technology if it doesn't make sense for the end customer. So I think it's more educating and giving people guidance on being able to also understand and explain what certain work does for the end customer, right? And then you go into the bigger pieces that the group needs to understand why they do a certain piece of work. And I usually call it the line of sight, where you have the mission of the company and you start to directly correlate the work to that mission of the company and make a decision if that actually drives value or not. In the end, you would like to measure the outcomes, right? So for example, if you improve the algorithm or you improve the ML learning for some aspects of the system, that you can actually prove that patients have gotten a better treatment, or you have saved an X amount of lives by doing that, right? That will be the ultimate value that you, as a technologist, will be able to explain also to your relative, like, well, I do kinds of engineering work.
Are you at that stage yet, at this point of time at Elsevier, that you can really measure that?
For some parts we can. For the more, well, for the groups or the teams that are more on the platform, it becomes incredibly difficult. Right? That's also with the DevOps piece, where you usually have the Dev and Ops. If the Ops is so far detached from the end customer and the group doesn't really know what their work is doing, you also lose the engagement piece. Right? So it's incredibly important to keep the group, the platform piece, like what does the work that you do on the algorithms actually do for a customer-facing product? That is a leadership piece that I think the leadership group is responsible for explaining that, or making it clear to everybody what that value truly is. Because in the end, the financial resources are important, but that's not why everybody shows up at their work, right? At the end of the day, they show up at their work for another reason, but the reason should always be drive value for the customer.
What's your biggest learning around that, Sander? And then we will go to Tim. But what's your biggest learning? It seems that you have experience with explaining the values and making sure that Dev and Ops is much more closer to each other, but also that you in the end can measure the impact. What is the biggest learning that you had by doing that? Because it seems like an experiment, right, that you started with a long time ago.
So then it's more from an enterprise perspective. I think for a smaller company, it's easier to do. but I know it sounds simple, but just start smaller, right? Start with the smaller experiments. Don't go, for example, we use OKRs as a tool, right? Just don't go full-blown OKRs on making it absolutely picture perfect. Start with doing things, right? Just don't overanalyze everything. Start with it, learn from it, make sure that you improve that cycle going forward pretty rapidly. I think that's one of the learnings that we've done, and the OKRs were more for the line of sight piece that I've explained before. But that's an important thing.
Start small, right?
Start small. Yeah, start small, but then also make sure that for an enterprise, that when you start small and you build stuff in a smaller way, make sure that it also scales. Right?
Yeah.
So that if you only build a POC for a small group, then for an enterprise, it's I mean, the value is less. Right?
Yeah. Cool, great stuff, right? Start small and start your experiment pretty small, and then also think about scaling.
Think up front. Start
think
small.
up front, right? That's a good thing. Tim, looking at all those organizations, right, that want to start or possibly also accelerate their DevOps transformation, what's your advice, right? Also hearing the stories over here, but also looking back at your own.
Thinking about ROI, I would say we're way more pragmatic in that sense. So it's not really something we measure for us. Being a startup and being a leader in some of the markets, we need to stay ahead of the pack. So getting an ID to production as fast as possible is key, which also brings you things like reduce mean time to recovery, for instance. If you can deploy a bug fix super fast, then that also helps in stability in the platform. And that will be something that I think is a good starting point. So take a look at the entire agile cycle, and then take the DevOps part out of it and start to measure it, right? How fast can you really get a merge request being deployed into production? What does it take? And think ahead. How fast do you want it to be? Does it really make sense to have a 1 minute deploy time if you only do 1 deploy per week? No, it doesn't, right?
Yes, that's cool.
It's fun, right? It's fun for our techies, right? We can start a competition about that, by the way.
Which I think then also hooks into what's being said earlier. DevOps is not a thing on its own. It's not something you need to achieve and get the gold medal in DevOps. It's part of the bigger picture. So for us, getting ideas to production is key to be ahead of the pack.
Oh, that's a cool thing. And if you then look at getting software faster production, in what kind of results did it end up? Right? Did you learn it from that perspective, from a technology point of view, or was it also that it was adding value already for the business at the point of time?
Definitely was. So we built a product that is also strongly customer centric. So we, for instance, have UX designers or product owners in all of the teams, which on almost a daily basis talk to our customers. So if the developers in the team can get an ID to production fast, and the next day or that same day UX can contact the customer to get feedback back in, the next day you can already make your next iteration, right? So that really speeds up things. Which again, right, first it's just about speed, stability, getting ideas to production.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I also hear non-technology skill sets like UX, right? And in the end, also getting the customers in. And in the end, that's where the value is, I think, of running those, or let's say starting with DevOps or running DevOps transformations or leading so-called DevOps enterprises, right? Because in the end, as I heard all of you, it's not only about technology anymore. We can also call it bus DevOps, right? It's a combination of business and DevOps. Yeah. At this point, we also get our questions in from the audience. Let's wait a couple of seconds for that. One more question for you, Sjoerd. What is the advice that you should give while we are waiting for the questions out of the public?
Yeah, so I think already stolen by my colleague was indeed start small and scale fast. So don't repeat that one, but I would say if you are a company like ours that has a legacy or better heritage, do check if your leadership is up to it. It's key thing. If they they should have the agility to actually change their role, reinvent themselves, and otherwise, fix that first, because otherwise the teams will not get anywhere.
As said in the beginning, right? It can be an impediment or it can be an
Wow.
accelerator, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So I see the first question of the audience popping up over here. The question is for you, Sander. We talked a lot about skills, right? We also talked a lot about skill sets, but how about behavior around DevOps? Did you need to make a change around that as well with the people?
Good question.
And we have a
Yes.
great audience, right? So
Yes, yes. Yeah. I was actually surprised, right? And the experience that I had in the past was, it's what the heritage piece also that we had. Sometimes I felt that we probably couldn't move that fast because the large group was not basically on the DevOps train yet. But I was actually quite surprised that how flexible a large portion of that group was to actually adjust their, I won't say behaviors, but adjust to the newer ways of working and get them on board. And especially give credit to people that haven't been in technology for the majority of their life, right? So they were in our case, they were more in the publishing space, right? It's a totally different space, but pivoting into technology where a lot of the items are moving much faster. I was actually pleasantly surprised how fast people were able to adjust their ways of working, were open and willing to learn, be more curious, pivot their skill set into understanding software engineering, for example, why they were primarily in ops for the past 10 years, for example. That really surprised me how much people we actually got on board with a newer way of working. And for a part of the group that pivot wasn't happening, right? So then also for a certain group, I think in a good way, we parted ways, which I think was the right thing for both the company and for the specific individuals. But again, also from a leadership perspective, sometimes the tough choices also need to be made depending on the ambition level and the goals where the company wants to go, right? How aggressive are you going to be at making that pivot, and how fast do you want to get there? And that all depends on how fast you're willing to change parts of the organization.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Hopefully this has answered your question.
I hope it did.
Yeah, I hope it did, right? So next question. I think the question is for Sjoerd. Sjoerd, you talked about dev and ops in the very first beginning. This question is more about closing that bridge, right? And closing that gap, or building that bridge, sorry, and closing that gap. How did you do that in such an environment, right? Because Schiphol is an airport, mission critical, right? Pretty critical. So how did you manage it?
Yeah, so Schiphol is an airport, and an airport does many things, right? So what if you look at what we do at our asset management products, or what we have in our commercial products, or in our operational safety and security products, it's a whole wide variety. So what we did is basically the advice that we just gave. So start small and let the results also, tell their own story. So what you saw by actually combining the teams, and we had 2 teams that were actually in fact asking that themselves, saying, hey, yeah, we do this separate work, but basically we're on the phone with each other like all day. Can we not just sit together? So we just said, okay, we put the teams together, and there were like 2 managers looking at a combined team, and then one of those managers said, yeah, what am I doing here? I'm leaving. So you had your first saving in the manager, and the manager that states, basically concluded, I have to change the way I act. So in fact, what we did was like follow the energy. You saw the production go up, but also the employee performance score, which is the way how we measure, are the teams happy? And then actually this story, which was so in one part of the organization, we put it on the stage, and we use it as an inspirational case to all the others. So what I think that you can take for the person raised the question, actually use the energy in the organization, try it out. Also, if it fails and there's a great learning, put it just as well as on the stage if it's a great success, and take it from there. So that is how actually our journey went, from a small place where we spread it from there.
Cool, great. So we're heading towards the next question. Let's see. That one is about skill sets and how we enable them within companies. Can I ask you that question? It's okay, you have all those tools, right? You start small, but in the end, your teams in the end need to learn new skills. How did you facilitate that? Because this question is about facilitation, right? How do companies like yours facilitate that learning journey? I'm interested.
It's actually quite a interesting question, I would say, because doing DevOps and everything that's around it, and we are, currently on the journey to move to Kubernetes, for instance, is not something you can, I would say, typically require from all the engineers to be able to do that. So we have a central DevOps team, an SRE team, DevOps skills injected in all of the teams. The SRE team provides the standards, so it's standardized around how you would deploy to production. We provide what we call a service chassis that delivers metrics, logging, metrics, observability, everything is there. Kind of a basic template, and teams can build on top of that. So the hard work and thinking in that sense is centralized in SRE team, and we try to leverage that knowledge and technology kind of as an open source project in all of the teams that are the end users.
Oh, nice.
So that makes the knowledge transfer part easier. You don't need to have a lot of DevOps skills in all of the teams that do that, because we try to do that centrally.
That's cool, great. And just a question from my side on that topic. Did you make use of guilds?
Yeah, we do.
Cool. And how did you facilitate that? Because guilds also ask time, right? And learning is also about investment again. And it's DevOps is not only about the hard implementation of technology or new practices, processes, and tools, of course, but it's also about learning. How did you manage that within the company?
So
to create those guilds, right?
come together every now and then. They debate on new technologies. They visit conferences together to get to learn new things. And then we have a couple of mechanisms via which that can be turned, for instance, to a proof of concept. First of all, we have work groups. We like to do cross-team work groups, which we just allocate X amount of time within the team. So these people really get enabled to work a couple of days per sprint, for instance, on exploring new technologies, making a proof of concept, or even solving a problem that is cross-team. Another thing which we like to do is just to do hackathons, right? Just allocate a full day for the entire development team to go nuts. You can pick a team. It could be something that's completely out of scope of the company. You do a Internet of Things hackathon day, for instance, but it could also be a day in, solve your biggest itch. What really is blocking you from becoming faster? That is currently not on a roadmap, and you really like to get that done. So yeah, I think you can just time box that. You need to have a way of time boxing it and get focus time for the engineers to really solve that problem at hand.
Oh, cool. Sounds great. Great stuff. Next question. I see it's all about examples in the world out there. Sander, this question is possibly for you. Hopefully you can answer it. What kind of companies are now examples for you as a leader, right? Where you learn from, or you say, hey, I'm following those, and why?
Oh,
don't come up with Apple, right?
Well, I can come up with a FANG, but I mean
up.
I think that's too simple. I've worked at
Google.
Well, I've worked at Google myself, but that was years back. But when I look at what they had at that point in time, they were quite ahead. While I'll still look at certain companies, they were already ahead then. Right? So that's definitely one that I follow. Project Aristotle, like they produce also all kinds of white papers that, in certain cases they lead the direction of where a certain group of the field is actually heading into. So I tend to monitor them because I have a love for that company from the past. And I mean, it's maybe not specifically companies, but I do a lot of, I use Cloudcast, for example.
Oh yeah.
And they got a lot of good in-depth vertical topics around about cloud engineering or cutting edge on machine learning or AI. So I tend to more follow those because that's where you usually see a glimpse of what the future could be. So you see the diamonds in the rough. And I think I'm some kind of a miner, so I look at those little things Which I think is, that could be really cool. If people do that at scale, how could that work at a bigger company? Instead of just following what the other bigger ones are doing, you also take a little bit of a more broader look, like, and that could also be something that could be interesting for us.
Cool. So write that down, right? Cloudcast.
Cloudcast is pretty cool.
Cool. Great. Let's see. Last question, possibly from the audience. I think this one is for you, Sjoerd.
Bring it on.
It's about automation. What kind of automation did you? How did you facilitate that between Dev and Ops? How did you start with that? Because hey, you should start with somewhere. We just learned about continuous delivery pipelines, continuous delivery, of course. But what was the first thing where you start with? Ooh, that's the question all about.
Yeah. So I would also have the previous question. So
yeah,
let me think about this one. So so basically, as we said, we let this happen by the team. And like also the colleagues on the site, we say freedoms within guardrails and craftsmanship within guilds. And that's one way we approach it, very consistent there. But the moment you start something new, you don't have those guardrails yet, right? So you basically give the space, also covered in the interview, in this conversation before, for the teams to actually start something new. It's not the cool answer that probably the person in the audience hoped for. It was dead technology, and this was the problem we solved it for, and we picked it because it was better than that and that alternative. So apologies for this answer. But in fact, you know, me as responsible, I was not in that team. I don't know. This was a choice within the team made to cover a specific topic. And we use then, if then this is successful and it's accepted wider, and for a certain moment you get the threat of having several tools for the same thing, which is actually going to make life more difficult, then it's about creating guardrails around it. So then you need the guild. So, you know, it's not as crisp as you maybe hoped for your last question, but it's a true story.
Who wants to add something to that, to this question? What to automate first, looking at your DevOps journey? From your perspective, right?
Management.
Yeah.
It's maybe a bit of a strange answer, but I think you can automate quite some management policies, things like that, away, which saves up time at management. Code quality, for instance, things a developer can or can't do. Should it be documented? Yes or no? I like that, because I hate to chase people to tell them, you know, you should have done this instead of that, for instance, or you forgot this. If you can automate that, frees up team leads, management, those kind of things.
That's a good thing, right? In the world of DevOps, which is all about automation and using technology, automate the managers within your company.
Yeah.
Cool. We're at the end of today's book launch, of course. And I would like to thank, of course, Sjoerd, Xander, and Tim. But if I look back right now as a high performance organization specialist, I got some key learnings, right? Looking at your stories, but also the book itself. Last one was, of course, management and leadership. We have talked a lot about that. And it's also about getting rid of some leadership that is standing in the way, but also about acceleration. And we just learned that we are here as leaders to facilitate that journey. We need to put the autonomy, so-called autonomy, as low as possible within the organization, and we need to facilitate the change, right, throughout that journey. Was an interesting one, because as a manager, you might want to lead on everything, right? Saying like, hey, this is maybe what you should use. And indeed, also in the question about the examples from the audience, it's also about facilitating and creating your own journey, not only looking at others, right? So it's facilitating the passion as a leader within the organization for DevOps. Another key enabler from my side is, of course, technology. I heard a lot about technology today. And hopefully you also did that, because otherwise we were listening to other stories. But technology has been one of the red threads throughout all the stories. Technology not only has helped us automation, but also creating feedback loops with our customers, right? And in the end, those insights are helpful to indeed talk about ROIs, convince people that are needed within your company to change indeed maybe the value process or the value stream within your company, but also improve the products, right? Like at SV you're doing with hopefully all the end users. Those were my two key enablers. Leadership, right, and technology go hand in hand in enablement. Of course, we also learned a lot about skill sets and behavior, but I think those two worlds, right, if you look at your perspective, get the right leadership in, lead by example, autonomy as low as possible, and of course, start measuring your impact, make use of the right technology to make sure that you help out our customers. My two key enablers. For now, we have a book, right? The High Performing DevOps Enterprises book launch. After this, let's say show, so-called show, it's on the website. It's on devon.nl. You can download it over there. If you already have subscribed yourself to it, you will receive an email later on with more information about that. But please go to the website of devon.nl to read not only the story of all these great authors, but also other people that have put in their best to create this book, this disruptive book looking at DevOps journeys. In case you're curious about how Devon could help you out with, of course, your DevOps acceleration, go as well to the devon.nl website or devon.global, so we can help you out by doing that. I want to thank you. I want to thank the guests of today. I want to thank you for your time again. And I want to wish you a lot of fun with reading those books. And hopefully, yeah, this is just the start right in the end of the DevOps journey. So hopefully you can learn and you can share your experience as well. Because what I have learned today, DevOps is also about sharing your experiences with others and learning from each other. And in the end, it's not only a leadership thing, but it's a thing that we should own all within the world of technology. Thank you again. Go to devon.nl for the book. And of course, have a great day. See you around. Bye-bye.